My sister said I owed her money because I didn't stop her teen pregnancy. Her custody hearing was enlightening. When my sister Kayla got pregnant at 17, I was 23 and working 2 jobs to pay for community college. She'd been sneaking out with her boyfriend Tony for months, despite my warnings that he was bad news. I'd tried talking to her about protection, about waiting, about Tony's 3 other girlfriends, but she'd scream that I wasn't her mother and couldn't tell her what to do. When she announced her pregnancy at dinner, our parents kicked her out and she moved in with Tony's family. I offered to help her look into adoption agencies or support programs, but she said she didn't need my fake concern. 6 months later, Tony left her for another girl, and his parents told Kayla to find somewhere else to live. She showed up at my apartment with a newborn named Destiny, saying as her older sister I was obligated to help. Not asking, telling. She said if I'd been a better role model and guided her properly, she never would have gotten pregnant, so this was partially my fault. She actually said I owed her for failing as a sister. I let her stay for what I thought would be a few days while she figured things out. Those days turned into months of hell. Kayla expected me to watch Destiny while she went out with friends because she said she was still young and deserved a life. She'd leave for entire weekends, turning off her phone while I had to call out of work to watch her baby. When I complained, she said I should have taught her about responsibility when she was younger, so this was my chance to make up for it. She'd spend the child support money from Tony on clothes for herself, then demand I buy formula and diapers because I had a job. When I said I couldn't afford it, she'd say I should have made sure she stayed in school so she could have a job too, but I'd failed her by not forcing her to make better choices. The mental gymnastics were insane. Everything was my fault for not preventing her pregnancy despite her fighting me every step of the way. My rent was late because I was buying baby supplies. I failed my semester because I missed classes watching Destiny. I lost one of my jobs because I kept calling out. Kayla said these were small sacrifices compared to what she'd given up, and I should be grateful she was letting me be part of Destiny's life. She actually said I was lucky she was giving me a chance to be a proper sister finally. The breaking point was when Kayla applied for government assistance and listed me as Destiny's primary caregiver without telling me. She'd been collecting benefits for months while I was actually raising her kid. She used my address, my income information, everything. When I confronted her, she said I was basically Destiny's mom anyway since I did everything, so it made sense for me to be legally responsible. She said this was my opportunity to have the child I'd probably never have on my own since I was too boring to keep a man. That's when I started keeping records. Every time Kayla left Destiny with me, I wrote down dates and times. Every receipt for baby supplies I bought, saved. Every text where she said she was going out and didn't know when she'd be back, screenshot. Every time she called me mom in front of Destiny because she couldn't be bothered to correct her, recorded. 6 months of detailed documentation of abandonment. Then Kayla made a mistake. She posted online about being a struggling single mom who got no help from anyone, trying to get sympathy and donations from strangers. She said her family had abandoned her and she was raising Destiny completely alone while working 3 jobs. People started sending her money through crowdfunding apps. She'd raised $2,000 on lies when I decided enough was enough. I filed for emergency custody of Destiny. The court date was set and Kayla laughed, saying no judge would give a baby to an aunt over her mother. She didn't take it seriously, didn't even get a lawyer, just showed up in clubbing clothes she'd worn the night before, still smelling like alcohol and smoke. I came with 6 months of evidence and my lawyer cousin Rita, who'd agreed to help after hearing how Kayla had been treating me. The judge asked Kayla basic questions about Destiny's routine. She didn't know what formula she used, what size diapers she wore, when her last doctor's appointment was. When asked about Destiny's favorite toy, Kayla guessed wrong. The judge asked where Destiny was during Kayla's 3 jobs she'd claimed online, and Kayla stammered that I watched her sometimes. That's when Rita presented the evidence. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Rita opened the binder with deliberate slowness, letting the pages fan out so everyone could see how thick it was. The judge leaned forward slightly as Rita started pulling out receipts, laying them across the table in neat rows. Each one showed my name, my card number, my purchases, formula, diapers, baby wipes, clothing in gradually increasing sizes as Destiny grew. Rita pointed to the dates, explaining how they matched up with text messages, where Kayla said she was going out and didn't know when she'd be back. The judge picked up one receipt dated from 3 months ago, a grocery store purchase at 2 in the morning because Destiny had run out of formula, and I'd had to leave my overnight shift to buy more. Rita showed the text from that same night where Kayla said she was at a club downtown and her phone was dying. Kayla's face went pale as Rita kept pulling out more evidence, stacking it higher. 6 months of documentation spread across the table like proof of a crime. The timestamps on the receipts matched the screenshots of Kayla's social media posts, showing her at parties, at bars, at concerts, always smiling and carefree while I was home changing diapers. Rita presented the calendar I'd kept. Every single day marked with either a K for when Kayla was actually home with Destiny, or an N for when I was the one doing everything. The pattern was obvious. Weeks would go by with nothing but N's, then maybe 1 or 2 K's before another long stretch of me being the only parent. The judge studied the calendar without speaking, her finger tracing along the rows of letters. Kayla tried to shrink in her seat, her eyes darting between the evidence and the door like she was calculating if she could just leave. The judge set down the calendar and looked directly at Kayla. She asked about the government assistance application, reading the date it was filed and the information listed. Kayla's hands twisted together in her lap as she stammered something about how she thought it was fine since I was watching Destiny most of the time anyway. Her voice got higher and faster as she tried to explain, saying she didn't understand all the paperwork and just filled out what made sense. The judge's expression didn't change, but something about her posture got straighter, more rigid. Rita didn't wait for Kayla to finish. She pulled out another stack of papers showing the benefits Kayla had collected over 5 months, the dollar amounts highlighted in yellow. Then Rita showed my bank statements from those same months, pointing out overdraft fees and late payment charges because I'd been buying everything Destiny needed while Kayla pocketed the assistance money meant for childcare. The judge asked Kayla directly what she'd spent the benefit money on, if not Destiny's care. Kayla opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at me like I might help her, might give her the right answer, but I just sat there with my hands folded on the table. Rita filled the silence by presenting copies of Kayla's credit card statements, showing purchases at clothing stores, makeup counters, and bars on the same dates the benefits were deposited. The judge's jaw tightened visibly. Rita moved to the crowdfunding campaign next, pulling up Kayla's posts on a tablet and turning it so the judge could read. The judge put on reading glasses and scrolled through Kayla's feed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She read one post out loud, her voice flat and professional, but somehow making every word sound worse. Kayla had written about being completely alone, about her family turning their backs on her, about working 3 jobs just to keep her baby fed. The judge looked up from the tablet and asked Kayla to name one of those 3 jobs. The courtroom went quiet. Kayla's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words but couldn't figure out which ones to use. She said something about babysitting sometimes and doing some online work, but couldn't provide any details when the judge pressed. Rita showed the judge the crowdfunding total, $2,000 raised on completely false claims. The judge asked if Kayla had reported that income, and Kayla's silence was answer enough. Rita presented screenshots of messages from people who donated, people saying they hoped things got better for her, people offering prayers and support to a single mom they thought was struggling alone. The judge's expression shifted from stern to something closer to disgusted. Kayla started crying, her shoulders shaking as tears ran down her face. She said she was desperate, that she didn't know what else to do, that everything had fallen apart, and she just needed help. Her voice broke on the last word, and for a second she almost sounded genuine. The judge waited for Kayla to finish crying before asking why she hadn't asked her family for help, instead of lying to strangers online. Kayla glanced at me and something flickered across her face that I'd never seen before, something that looked like actual shame instead of her usual defensiveness. She mumbled something about pride and not wanting to admit she'd failed. The judge asked if she understood that fraud was a crime, not just a mistake made out of desperation. Kayla nodded but kept her eyes down, her hands wiping at her wet cheeks. Rita remained perfectly still, letting the moment stretch out so the judge could see exactly who Kayla was under all the excuses. Haley Wagner stood up from her seat at the side table, carrying a folder that looked almost as thick as Rita's binder. She introduced herself to the judge as the guardian ad litem assigned to represent Destiny's interests in this case. The judge nodded for her to proceed. Haley opened her folder and began reading from her preliminary report, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. She'd visited my apartment 3 times over the past month, observing how I interacted with Destiny and how Destiny responded to me. She'd also attempted to observe Kayla with Destiny, but Kayla had missed 2 scheduled visits and showed up 40 minutes late to the 3rd. Haley described how Destiny called me Mama consistently, how she ran to me when she was upset, how she showed me her toys and wanted my attention during play. She noted that Destiny's attachment to me showed all the signs of a secure primary caregiver relationship. When Haley had asked Destiny about her other mama, meaning Kayla, Destiny had looked confused and said Mama was right here, pointing at me. The judge listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on the papers in front of her. Haley's recommendation was clear and direct. I should receive temporary custody while a full evaluation was completed over the next several months. Kayla should have supervised visitation only until she demonstrated consistent ability to meet Destiny's basic needs. The judge thanked Haley and set the report aside, her hand resting on top of it like she was already decided. The judge announced she was granting me temporary legal custody of Destiny effective immediately. Kayla's face crumpled like someone had physically hit her. The judge continued speaking, explaining that Kayla would have supervised visitation twice a week at the Family Services Center, and that she needed to demonstrate significant improvement in stability and judgment before any changes would be considered. Kayla tried to interrupt, half standing from her chair, but the judge held up one hand and told her to sit down. The judge's voice got firmer as she explained this wasn't about Kayla's feelings or wants. This was about what Destiny needed. Stability. Consistency. A caregiver who put her needs first. Kayla sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. The judge didn't seem moved by the crying. She just kept outlining the visitation schedule, the requirements Kayla needed to meet, the timeline for future hearings. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Destiny was safe now, legally protected. No matter what Kayla did, she couldn't just take her back. The judge wasn't finished. She ordered Kayla to repay all fraudulent government benefits within 6 months or face additional legal action. Then she said she was referring the crowdfunding fraud to the prosecutor's office for review of potential criminal charges. Kayla's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fresh panic. She started to say something, but the judge cut her off, saying the court had no discretion in cases of potential fraud. Rita squeezed my hand under the table. I wanted to feel bad for Kayla, wanted to feel guilty about what was happening to her, but mostly I just felt tired and relieved. She'd done this to herself. Every choice, every lie, every time she'd blamed me instead of taking responsibility. This was the consequence she'd been avoiding for almost 2 years. Kayla looked at me across the courtroom and I saw anger there now, cutting through the tears. She thought I'd betrayed her, thought I'd destroyed her life on purpose. She didn't understand that I'd just stopped letting her destroy mine. The hearing ended and everyone stood as the judge left through her private door. The moment she was gone, Kayla came at me across the courtroom, her voice rising to a scream before she even reached my side of the room. She shouted that I'd ruined everything, that I'd stolen her daughter, that I was a vindictive witch who'd planned this whole thing. Rita stepped between us immediately, positioning herself so Kayla had to stop or physically push through her. Rita's voice stayed calm but firm as she told Kayla that this behavior was exactly why she'd lost custody, that she needed to leave before she made things worse for herself. The bailiff moved closer, his hand resting on his belt in a way that made his readiness clear. Kayla kept screaming over Rita's shoulder, calling me names I won't repeat, saying things about my life and my choices that cut even though I knew they came from her pain. Other people in the courtroom were staring now. A clerk paused in gathering papers to watch. Rita told Kayla one more time to leave or the bailiff would remove her. Kayla finally stepped back, her chest heaving, her face red and blotchy from crying. She pointed at me and said this wasn't over, that I hadn't won anything. Then she turned and shoved through the courtroom doors hard enough that they banged against the walls. I picked Destiny up from the daycare attached to the courthouse where she'd been playing during the hearing. She reached for me immediately, her little arms wrapping around my neck. The drive home took 20 minutes and she fussed in her car seat the whole way, sensing something was different even if she didn't understand what. Back at our apartment, I made her lunch while she clung to my leg, not wanting to let me out of her sight. She picked at her food, eating maybe half before pushing the plate away. I carried her to her room for nap time and she fought it at first, crying and calling for Mama in a way that made my heart hurt. But I held her and rocked her and sang the song she liked, and eventually her eyes got heavy. She fell asleep with her hand fisted in my shirt, making sure I couldn't leave without her knowing. I sat there on the floor next to her crib watching her breathe, watching her face relax into peaceful sleep. The weight of what had just happened settled over me like a physical thing. I wasn't just her aunt anymore, wasn't just helping out temporarily. I was her legal guardian now, responsible for everything, every decision, every problem. Every need she had was mine to meet. She was 2 years old and I was 24, and this was my life now. That evening after Destiny woke up from her nap and I'd fed her dinner and given her a bath, my phone rang. Raina's name showed on the screen. I answered while Destiny played with blocks on the living room floor. Raina said she'd heard about the hearing from my mother, said she was proud of me for standing up for Destiny when nobody else would. She offered to help with childcare when I had classes, said she had flexible hours at her job and could watch Destiny a few times a week if I needed. I thanked her, feeling tears prick at my eyes from the kindness after such a hard day. Then Raina said something that made me freeze. She admitted the family had known for months that Kayla was taking advantage of me. They'd all seen it happening, seen me struggling, seen Kayla partying while I raised her baby. But nobody wanted to get involved in the drama, didn't want to pick sides, didn't want to make things awkward at family gatherings. They'd just watched and stayed quiet while I drowned. Raina apologized, said she should have spoken up sooner, should have offered help before it got this bad. I told her it was okay, even though it wasn't really. even though knowing they'd all just watched hurt almost as much as everything Kayla had done. But I needed the help now more than I needed to hold a grudge. Destiny threw a block and laughed, oblivious to the adult conversation happening over her head. I told Raina I'd take her up on the childcare offer, and we made plans for her to come by next week. 2 days after the hearing, my phone rang while I was giving Destiny lunch. The caller ID showed a county number I didn't recognize. A woman introduced herself as someone from the prosecutor's office working on benefit fraud cases. She needed me to come in and give a formal statement about Kayla using my information without permission to apply for government assistance. I felt my stomach drop, even though she explained right away that I wasn't in trouble. She said I was the victim of identity theft, and they needed my statement to build the case against Kayla. I scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon and spent the rest of the day feeling sick. My sister could actually face criminal charges because of what she'd done. Part of me felt guilty for starting all this, even though I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Kayla had stolen from the government using my name and address. She'd committed fraud, but she was still my sister, and the idea of her going to jail made me want to throw up. My phone started blowing up that evening with texts from Kayla. The first few were apologies saying she was sorry and didn't mean for things to go this far. Then they shifted to accusations claiming I was destroying her life over a misunderstanding. She said I was being vindictive and trying to punish her for past mistakes. She texted that I'd always been jealous of her, and this was my chance to ruin everything for her. I watched the messages come in one after another, my phone buzzing constantly on the coffee table while Destiny played with her blocks. Some texts begged me to call the prosecutor and tell them it was all a mistake. Others called me horrible names and said I was a terrible sister who never cared about family. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Rita. She called me within minutes and told me to stop responding completely. She said to document every single message but don't engage at all. Kayla was spiraling, and anything I said could be twisted and used against me in the ongoing custody evaluation. I muted Kayla's number and tried to focus on getting Destiny ready for bed. The first supervised visitation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at the Family Services Center downtown. I dressed Destiny in the outfit Kayla had bought her months ago, hoping it might help. We arrived 15 minutes early and checked in at the front desk. The waiting room had worn carpet and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. Destiny sat on my lap playing with a stuffed animal while we waited. And waited. 20 minutes past the scheduled time, Kayla still hadn't shown up. 30 minutes. 40 minutes. I was about to ask the receptionist what to do when Kayla finally walked through the door. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy and pulled back in a messy bun. Her clothes looked slept in. She smelled like she hadn't showered in days, a mix of stale cigarettes and body odor that made me want to move away from her. The supervisor, a woman who introduced herself as Nicolette, led us back to a small room with toys and a table. Kayla reached for Destiny immediately, but Destiny started crying and reaching back for me. I saw something break in Kayla's face, a crack in whatever armor she'd been wearing. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back and tried to smile at Destiny. Nicolette suggested Kayla sit on the floor and let Destiny come to her when ready. Kayla sat down hard and pulled out her phone while Destiny clung to my leg. Nicolette sat in the corner with a clipboard taking notes. I watched her write things down every few minutes, her pen moving steadily across the page. Kayla tried to get Destiny interested in toys, but she didn't know which ones Destiny liked. She held up a doll and Destiny shook her head. She offered blocks and Destiny ignored them. When Destiny finally did start playing, she stayed near me, occasionally looking back to make sure I was still there. Kayla spent most of the hour scrolling on her phone, glancing up every so often to see what Destiny was doing. She tried to pick Destiny up once and Destiny screamed so loud that Nicolette had to intervene. Kayla's hands were shaking when she set Destiny back down. The whole visit felt wrong and sad, and I hated every minute of it. When the hour was up, Destiny practically threw herself at me and buried her face in my shoulder. Kayla stood there watching us leave, her arms hanging at her sides, looking more lost than I'd ever seen her. Nicolette called me 3 days later and asked if I could come in for a home evaluation. She showed up at my apartment the following Tuesday with a thick folder and a measuring tape. She walked through every room, opening cabinets, checking the smoke detectors, measuring the space in Destiny's bedroom. She asked about our daily routine, what time Destiny woke up, what she ate for breakfast, when she napped, what we did in the evenings. She wanted to see my childcare arrangements, and I showed her the schedule I'd worked out with the daycare near my work. She asked about my finances, and I pulled out my budget spreadsheet showing exactly where every dollar went. She looked at the receipts I'd kept for baby supplies, the documentation of every expense related to Destiny's care. She seemed impressed by how organized everything was despite my tiny apartment and limited income. She made notes constantly, her handwriting small and neat, filling page after page in her folder. Nicolette asked about my plans for the future. and I felt my throat get tight. I admitted I'd had to drop down to part-time at community college because I couldn't afford both tuition and childcare. My original plan had been to finish my degree this year and start looking for better jobs. Now I was taking 1 or 2 classes per semester when I could squeeze them in around work and taking care of Destiny. Nicolette nodded and wrote something in her folder that took several lines. She said it showed my commitment to putting Destiny's needs first, even when it meant sacrificing my own goals. I felt tears prick my eyes because it was true, but it also hurt to say out loud. My whole life had changed, and there was no going back to what I'd planned. Nicolette spent another hour going through emergency procedures, asking about my support system, reviewing Destiny's medical records. When she finally left, I felt exhausted and exposed, like she'd seen every corner of my life and found it barely adequate. Kayla started posting on social media again a few days later. I saw the first post when my friend sent me a screenshot asking if I was okay. Kayla had written a long story about how I'd manipulated the court system and stolen her baby through lies and fake evidence. She said I'd always been jealous of her and couldn't stand seeing her happy. She claimed I'd made up stories about her being a bad mother because I wanted Destiny for myself. The post had dozens of comments from people who didn't know the real story, all saying how terrible I was and how sorry they felt for Kayla. She posted again the next day with more accusations, each one more twisted than the last. She said I'd forged documents and paid people to lie in court. She said the judge was biased because Rita knew someone in the courthouse. She built this whole narrative where she was the innocent victim, and I was some kind of villain who'd orchestrated everything out of spite. I watched people believe her version of events and felt powerless to do anything about it. My mother called that weekend. I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer, but I picked up on the 4th ring. She said she'd seen Kayla's posts and wanted to know my side of the story. Then she asked if I really had to take things this far instead of working it out as a family. I felt anger rise up in my chest hot and fast. I reminded her that she'd kicked Kayla out when she got pregnant and had barely seen Destiny since she was born. I said she didn't get to question my choices when she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with the situation. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she changed the subject to ask how Destiny was doing, and if I needed anything. I told her we were fine and got off the phone as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking when I set my phone down. I was so tired of everyone having opinions about what I should do while offering no actual help. Rita called me that evening after seeing Kayla's posts. She told me to make all my social media accounts private immediately, and not to respond to any of Kayla's accusations online. She explained that anything I said publicly could be taken out of context and used against me in court. The best thing I could do was stay silent and let the evidence speak for itself. I followed her advice even though it killed me to watch people believe Kayla's lies. I wanted to defend myself, to tell everyone the truth about what had really happened. But I kept my mouth shut and made my accounts private, and watched my sister spin her story to anyone who would listen. It felt like losing even when I knew I was doing the right thing. The second supervised visit happened 2 weeks later. I brought Destiny to the Family Services Center expecting another awkward hour like the first time. But when we walked into the waiting room, Kayla was already there with a guy I'd never seen before. He had his arm around her shoulders and she was laughing at something he'd said. When she saw us, she jumped up and pulled the guy over. She introduced him as Lucas and told Destiny he was going to be her new daddy. Destiny hid behind my legs while Lucas tried to high-five her. The supervisor came out and immediately asked who Lucas was. Kayla said he was her boyfriend and she wanted him to meet Destiny during the visit. Nicolette's expression went hard and she separated them, explaining that only Kayla was approved for visitation. Kayla started arguing that Lucas was going to be part of Destiny's life, so he needed to be involved now. Nicolette repeated that the court order specified supervised visits for Kayla only, and if she couldn't follow that rule, the visit would be canceled. Lucas looked uncomfortable and said he'd wait in the car. Kayla shot me a look like this was somehow my fault, before following Nicolette back to the visitation room. I waited in the car while the visit finished, watching through the window as Kayla tried to get Destiny to play with blocks. Destiny kept looking toward the door where I'd left, and Kayla's frustration showed in how roughly she stacked the blocks. When the hour ended, Nicolette walked them out and gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Destiny ran to me and wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face against my jeans. Kayla stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. I buckled Destiny into her car seat and drove home without looking back. Nicolette called me that evening after I'd put Destiny to bed. She asked if we could talk about what she'd observed during the visit, and I settled onto my couch with a knot forming in my stomach. She said Kayla's behavior with the boyfriend showed concerning judgment about appropriate boundaries, especially bringing someone new around Destiny without proper introduction or approval. I agreed, remembering how uncomfortable the whole situation had felt. Then Nicolette asked if Kayla had a history of rushing into relationships, and I told her about Tony and how that had ended. I mentioned the 2 other serious boyfriends Kayla had introduced to Destiny in the past year, guys who'd been around for a few weeks before disappearing. Nicolette went quiet for a moment, then said she'd be noting this pattern in her evaluation. She thanked me for being honest and said she'd be in touch soon. 3 days later, Rita called with news that made my hands shake. The prosecutor had filed formal charges against Kayla for benefit fraud and theft by deception related to the crowdfunding campaign. Rita explained that the evidence I'd provided had been strong enough to warrant criminal prosecution, not just civil penalties. I felt sick even though I knew this was a natural consequence of Kayla's choices. That night, my phone rang at almost midnight. Kayla's name flashed on the screen and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her at first. She said the police had contacted her about the charges and she was going to jail, and this was all my fault for giving them the evidence. I let her cry for a minute before telling her I hadn't filed criminal charges. The prosecutor had done that on their own. She begged me to make them drop the charges, to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I explained as gently as I could that I didn't control what the prosecutor did, that once they had evidence of a crime, they had to pursue it. She called me a liar and hung up. The next scheduled visit came and went without Kayla showing up. I sat in the Family Services Center waiting room with Destiny for 20 minutes past the start time before Nicolette came out and said Kayla hadn't called to cancel. Destiny asked where her other mama was, and I didn't know what to tell her. We went home and I tried to keep our afternoon routine normal, but I felt sad watching Destiny look toward the door every time she heard a noise. The following week's visit was the same. No Kayla, no phone call, just me and Destiny sitting in that waiting room until Nicolette told us we could leave. She made notes on her clipboard and said this pattern of inconsistency was concerning. I asked if Kayla had given any reason for missing the visits, and Nicolette said she hadn't been able to reach her at all. Destiny stopped asking about her other mama after that second missed visit, which somehow made me sadder than the asking had. I'd been thinking about going back to the school full-time, but I needed childcare I could actually afford. The community college had a partnership with a daycare program that offered reduced rates for students, so I scheduled a tour. The director showed me around the toddler room where kids Destiny's age played with toys and did simple crafts. She asked about Destiny's routine and needs, and I answered all her questions easily because I knew everything about this kid's life. When she asked about allergies and medical history, I pulled out the folder I kept with all of Destiny's documents. The director smiled and said most parents weren't nearly this organized. I enrolled Destiny for 3 mornings a week so I could take more classes. Filling out the enrollment forms felt strange when I wrote my name on the line for guardian, instead of checking the box for aunt or other relative. The permanence of it hit me hard, seeing my name there in black ink as the person legally responsible for this child. 2 weeks later, Nicolette called and asked if I could meet her at her office the next afternoon. I arranged for my aunt to watch Destiny and showed up nervous about what she might have found. Nicolette had a thick file on her desk when I walked in, and she got straight to the point. She'd conducted a surprise home visit to Kayla's current address the day before. I felt my stomach drop, wondering what she'd discovered. Nicolette said she'd found Kayla living in a 1-bedroom apartment with her boyfriend and 2 of his roommates. The apartment had been cluttered with clothes and dishes piled everywhere, and there was no appropriate sleeping space for a child. When Nicolette had asked where Destiny would sleep if she came to visit, Kayla had gestured vaguely at the couch. Nicolette had also noted that one of the roommates had been smoking inside, despite Kayla claiming the apartment was smoke-free. Kayla had admitted she couldn't afford her own place anymore after paying for a lawyer to help with the criminal charges. Nicolette closed the file and looked at me directly. She said her evaluation would recommend I receive full custody with Kayla having supervised visitation only. I sat there processing what she'd just told me, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Nicolette explained that Kayla had shown no meaningful progress in addressing the concerns that led to the temporary custody order. She'd missed visits, made poor choices about her living situation, and demonstrated continued inability to prioritize Destiny's needs. The recommendation would go to the judge within the week, and then a final hearing would be scheduled. I thanked Nicolette for being thorough and honest, and she said she was just doing what was best for Destiny. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of knowing this was really happening. Kayla was going to lose custody permanently, and I was going to become a mother at 24 to a child I'd never planned to raise. Kayla must have found out about the recommendation because 3 nights later I woke up to pounding on my apartment door. I checked my phone and saw it was 11 at night. Through the peephole, I could see Kayla with her face red and streaked with tears, demanding to see Destiny. I called Rita first, keeping her on the phone while I decided what to do. Rita told me not to open the door and to call the police immediately. I dialed while Kayla kept pounding and yelling that I'd stolen her daughter and ruined her life. The neighbor's lights started coming on. When I told the dispatcher my sister was violating a custody order by showing up at my home, she said officers were on their way. Kayla was still pounding when I heard sirens. I watched through the peephole as 2 officers talked to her and she pointed at my door while crying. They walked her to their car and I saw her get in the back seat. One officer came to my door and I opened it with Rita still on the phone. He said they were giving Kayla a warning about violating the custody order and that if she came back, they'd arrest her. After he left, I locked the door and checked on Destiny, who'd somehow slept through the whole thing. The next morning, I woke up to a long email from Kayla. The subject line said, "Please read this," and I almost deleted it. But something made me open it. She wrote that she knew she'd messed everything up and that showing up at my apartment was wrong. She said she'd been talking to her therapist about her patterns and was starting to understand how her choices had hurt Destiny. She wanted to enroll in parenting classes and commit to regular therapy to prove she could change. The email sounded different from her usual blame and excuses, more genuine and self-aware. She asked if I would support her getting more visitation if she showed consistent improvement over time. She said she understood why I had custody and that Destiny deserved stability, but she wanted to be a real mom eventually. I read the email 3 times, feeling torn between hope that she might actually be changing and doubt based on all the times she'd made promises before. I called Rita and read her the email over the phone. Rita listened without interrupting, then asked what I wanted to do. I admitted I had conflicting feelings about wanting to help my sister, while also protecting Destiny from more disappointment and instability. Rita reminded me that Kayla had made promises before and broken them, that words were easy, but actions were what mattered. She said my primary responsibility was to Destiny's well-being, not to Kayla's feelings or my own guilt about the situation. We talked for almost an hour about boundaries and realistic expectations. Rita helped me understand that supporting Kayla's growth didn't mean changing the custody arrangement until she'd proven real, sustained change over a long period of time. I felt clearer after we hung up, knowing what I needed to say. I wrote back to Kayla that afternoon while Destiny napped. I told her I was glad she was recognizing her patterns, and that I would support her getting help. I said therapy and parenting classes were good steps and I hoped she'd stick with them. But I also said the custody arrangement needed to stay as it was until she demonstrated real, sustained change over time, not just a few weeks of effort. I explained that Destiny needed stability and consistency, and that meant I had to be cautious about any changes to our routine. I hit send and felt good about setting that boundary clearly. Kayla's response came back within an hour. She said I was being controlling and punishing her for past mistakes instead of giving her credit for trying to change now. She accused me of wanting to keep Destiny from her permanently, and said I was using the custody order as a weapon. Reading her words, I felt the familiar frustration of dealing with someone who still didn't understand that consequences weren't punishment. She was still focused on what she wanted, rather than what Destiny needed, and that told me everything about whether she'd actually changed. I didn't respond right away because I wanted to see if she'd actually follow through. Over the next week, photos started showing up in my email. Kayla sitting in a classroom with other parents, workbooks open in front of her. Kayla in a waiting room with forms on a clipboard. Screenshots of appointment confirmations for therapy sessions. Each one came with a short message saying she was trying, that she wanted to prove herself. I saved them all in a folder but didn't change anything about the custody arrangement or my expectations. When she asked if I'd noticed her progress, I told her I had and that I was glad she was taking these steps. But that real change meant sticking with it for months, not weeks. She got frustrated fast, texting back that she was doing everything right and I still wouldn't give her credit. She'd expected me to immediately reward her for showing up to a few classes, like that erased everything she'd done before. My phone rang late on a Tuesday while I was making dinner with Destiny playing at my feet. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Tony's voice came through, awkward and hesitant, asking how I was doing. We hadn't spoken since before I filed for custody, and hearing him now felt strange. He asked about the custody situation, whether things had been decided yet, whether he needed to get involved somehow. I told him the truth, that I had temporary custody and the final hearing was coming up, and that if he wanted visitation, he could pursue it through the proper legal channels. There was a long pause before he admitted he wasn't ready to be a real parent, that he was still figuring out his own life and didn't know how to take care of a kid. He just wanted to make sure Destiny was okay, that she was safe and being looked after properly. I assured him she was fine, that she was healthy and happy and had everything she needed. He thanked me and said he'd keep paying child support, but probably wouldn't push for visitation right now. The call ended and I felt a weird mix of relief and sadness, knowing Destiny's father was basically admitting he couldn't step up. Rita called me the following week with news about the fraud case. The prosecutor had offered Kayla a plea deal that would keep her out of jail if she agreed to repay all the fraudulent benefits she'd collected, complete 200 hours of community service, and stay on probation for 2 years. Rita explained this was actually generous considering the charges could have resulted in jail time, and that Kayla should take it. I asked what would happen if she didn't, and Rita said they'd go to trial and she'd probably lose given the evidence. A few days later, Rita confirmed Kayla had accepted the deal. She'd signed the papers and agreed to the repayment schedule, though Rita mentioned Kayla had complained the whole time about how unfair it was. At least it meant Destiny wouldn't have to deal with her mother being in jail, which felt like the best outcome for a bad situation. Destiny had a regular checkup scheduled with her pediatrician, routine stuff I'd been handling since I got custody. The doctor did the usual measurements and checks, asking questions about her eating and sleeping and behavior. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach drop. She'd noticed some delays in Destiny's development, things that suggested she might not have gotten consistent care in her first year. Speech was a little behind where it should be, and some of her motor skills weren't quite at the expected level for her age. The doctor said it wasn't anything major, but she recommended early intervention evaluations to make sure we caught any issues before they became bigger problems. I scheduled the appointments right there in the office, but the whole drive home I felt guilty. If I'd gotten custody sooner, if I'd pushed harder earlier, maybe Destiny wouldn't be dealing with these delays now. Rita reminded me later that I'd done everything I legally could as fast as possible, but the guilt still sat heavy in my chest knowing those first months with Kayla had affected Destiny in ways that might take years to fix. The final evaluation report from the social worker arrived at the courthouse about 6 weeks after the temporary custody order. Rita got a copy and read through it with me over coffee at a shop near campus. The report recommended I receive full legal custody with Kayla having supervised visitation twice monthly. Page after page documented Kayla's pattern of instability, her poor judgment in bringing boyfriends around during visits, her failure to prioritize Destiny's needs despite multiple opportunities to show improvement. The social worker had noted every missed visit, every time Kayla showed up unprepared or distracted, every instance where she demonstrated she still didn't understand what being a parent actually required. Rita said this report would carry significant weight with the judge, and that barring something unexpected, I should prepare for permanent custody. Reading through all that documentation of my sister's failures felt both validating and heartbreaking. My parents showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon without calling first. I opened the door to find both of them standing there looking uncomfortable, my mother holding a stuffed animal for Destiny. They asked if they could come in and talk, and I let them inside even though part of me wanted to slam the door. Destiny ran to show them her toys, not really remembering them but excited about visitors anyway. We sat in my tiny living room and my mother started crying before anyone said anything. She apologized for not supporting me sooner, for staying out of everything and leaving me to handle it alone. She admitted she'd been ashamed of how the family situation looked to outsiders, how it was easier to pretend nothing was happening than to get involved in the mess. She said watching me step up for Destiny while she did nothing made her realize she'd failed both her daughters in different ways. My father sat quietly for most of it, but eventually he spoke up too. He acknowledged that kicking Kayla out when she got pregnant probably made everything worse instead of teaching her responsibility like they'd hoped. He said watching me raise Destiny while working and going to the school showed him what real responsibility looked like, that I'd stepped up in ways they should have. They offered to help financially with Destiny's care going forward, to contribute to daycare or medical bills or whatever I needed. My father said they'd testify at the final hearing if it would help my case, that they'd tell the judge Kayla wasn't capable of providing stable care. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me was angry they were only showing up now that the hard part was done, but another part was relieved to finally have some family support. I told them I'd think about the financial help and let Rita know about their offer to testify. After they left, Destiny asked if those people were coming back, and I realized she didn't even know her own grandparents. 8 weeks after starting her parenting classes, Kayla completed the program, and her therapist wrote a letter for the court file. Rita got a copy and read it to me over the phone. The therapist said Kayla was making progress in understanding her patterns of blame and avoidance, that she was starting to recognize how her choices had affected Destiny and take accountability for her actions. The letter was positive overall, acknowledging the work Kayla had put in and the insights she'd gained through therapy. Rita was quiet for a moment after reading it, then said it was good that Kayla was working on herself, but that 8 weeks of classes and therapy didn't outweigh 18 months of documented neglect and abandonment. The letter would go in the file and the judge would consider it, but it wouldn't change the overwhelming evidence showing Kayla's pattern of instability and poor judgment. I felt conflicted reading about my sister's progress, wanting to believe she was really changing while knowing that wanting something didn't make it true. The conflicted feeling stuck with me for days. I kept thinking about how Kayla had actually shown up to classes, actually gone to therapy, actually tried to do something right for once. Part of me wanted to give her credit for that, to acknowledge the effort even if it didn't change the custody situation. But every time I started feeling like maybe I was being too hard on her, I'd remember something. The nights she'd disappeared without warning. The times Destiny had cried for hours while I tried to figure out how to soothe her because Kayla hadn't bothered teaching me her routines. The rent money I'd spent on diapers and formula. The semester I'd failed. Rita must have sensed my doubt because she called one evening and asked how I was doing with everything. I admitted I felt like the bad guy for not giving Kayla more credit for her recent efforts. Rita reminded me that 8 weeks didn't erase 18 months of neglect, that Kayla was only doing the bare minimum now because she was facing real consequences, not because something fundamental had changed inside her. She pointed out that Kayla had plenty of opportunities to step up before I filed for custody, and she'd chosen not to until a judge forced her hand. That conversation helped me remember why I'd fought for custody in the first place. The final custody hearing got scheduled for 6 weeks out, and I spent the week before preparing my testimony with Rita. We met at her office after I dropped Destiny at daycare, and she coached me through the questions I'd likely face. She warned me that Kayla's public defender would try to paint me as vindictive, as someone using the custody system to punish my sister instead of doing what was best for Destiny. Rita told me to stay calm no matter what they said, to keep my answers focused on specific examples rather than emotional accusations. We practiced for hours, Rita playing the role of hostile attorney while I learned to respond without getting defensive. She taught me to redirect any attacks back to facts, to answer questions about my motivations by talking about Destiny's needs instead. By the end of the week, I felt as prepared as I could be, though my stomach still twisted every time I thought about sitting in that courtroom and testifying against my own sister. The morning of the final hearing, I woke up at 5 after barely sleeping. I'd laid out my clothes the night before, a simple blue dress that Rita said looked professional without trying too hard. I fed Destiny her breakfast and dropped her at daycare early, hugging her tight before I left. The director told me not to worry, that they'd take good care of her no matter how long the hearing took. I met Rita outside the courthouse at 8:30, and we went through everything one more time while sitting on a bench in the hallway. She reminded me to breathe, to pause before answering questions, to look at the judge instead of Kayla when I spoke. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Kayla arrived 15 minutes before the hearing started with a public defender I'd never seen before. She wore black pants and a plain white shirt, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked tired but put together. Nothing like the mess she'd been at the emergency custody hearing. Her public defender was a young guy who kept checking his phone and didn't seem particularly invested in the case. Kayla glanced at me once when she walked in but didn't say anything, just sat down at her table and folded her hands in front of her. I noticed her leg bouncing under the table, the same nervous habit she'd had since we were kids. Rita squeezed my arm and told me Kayla's appearance didn't change anything, that looking responsible for one morning didn't erase 18 months of documented neglect. The bailiff called us to order and Judge Sterling Boggs entered the courtroom. She was the same judge from the emergency hearing, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through everyone. She settled into her seat and opened the file in front of her, taking a moment to review before looking up at both tables. The judge started by summarizing where we were in the proceedings, noting that temporary custody had been granted to me 4 months ago, with supervised visitation for Kayla. She said today's hearing would determine permanent custody arrangements based on the evidence and testimony presented. My stomach twisted into knots. Judge Boggs picked up Nicolette's evaluation report and spent several minutes reading through it silently. Then she looked directly at Kayla and asked what had changed since the temporary custody order was issued. Kayla stood up when her public defender nudged her and started talking about the parenting classes she'd completed. She mentioned going to therapy every week and said she was learning to take responsibility for her choices. The judge listened without expression, then asked Kayla to tell her about Destiny's current routine. Kayla hesitated and said Destiny probably woke up around 7 or 8, that she liked cereal for breakfast. The judge asked what kind of cereal, and Kayla guessed Cheerios. Rita made a note on her legal pad. The judge asked what size diapers Destiny wore now, and Kayla said she thought maybe size 4 or 5. Wrong again. Destiny had been in size 6 for 2 months. The judge asked when Destiny's last doctor appointment was, and Kayla said she wasn't sure, maybe a few weeks ago. It had been 3 days ago for her regular checkup, and I'd sent Kayla the appointment reminder like I always did. The judge's expression didn't change, but she made several notes before moving on. Haley Wagner testified next, the guardian ad litem who'd been representing Destiny's interests throughout the proceedings. She took the stand and explained that she'd observed multiple visits between Kayla and Destiny, as well as spending extensive time evaluating my home and care. Haley said Destiny showed secure attachment to me, that she was meeting all her developmental milestones, and that my home provided a stable and nurturing environment. Then Haley described Destiny's behavior during visits with Kayla, how Destiny would cry when I left and spent most of the visits asking when I was coming back. She said Destiny seemed confused by Kayla's presence, and didn't show the same comfort level she displayed with me. Haley recommended continuing the current custody arrangement with potential for increased visitation if Kayla maintained consistent progress over the next 6 months. She emphasized that Destiny's need for stability had to be the priority, especially given her young age and the disruption she'd already experienced. Kayla's public defender tried to argue that the anxiety was normal for any child in this situation, but Haley calmly explained that Destiny's reactions went beyond normal adjustment and indicated insecure attachment to her biological mother. The judge called a brief break before the next witness, and I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. Rita followed me and told me everything was going well, that Haley's testimony was exactly what we needed. I asked if Kayla's public defender could somehow turn this around, and Rita said no, that the evidence was too overwhelming. We went back into the courtroom, and Kayla's therapist appeared on the video screen for remote testimony. The therapist was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who spoke carefully about confidentiality while still providing relevant information. She confirmed that Kayla had been attending weekly therapy sessions for the past 2 months and was working on accountability and recognizing her patterns of blame and avoidance. The therapist said Kayla was making progress in understanding how her choices had affected Destiny and was beginning to take genuine responsibility for her actions. Then the judge asked if the therapist could recommend unsupervised visitation at this time. The therapist paused before answering, then said that while Kayla was doing important work in therapy, real change took sustained time and effort. She explained that 2 months of therapy couldn't undo years of established patterns, and that Destiny's young age and need for stability meant any changes to the custody arrangement should happen very gradually. The therapist said she couldn't recommend unsupervised visitation at this point, though she hoped Kayla would continue her therapeutic work regardless of the custody outcome. Kayla looked down at her hands while the therapist spoke, her shoulders hunched forward. Rita presented her evidence next, methodically walking the judge through documentation of my stable housing, steady employment, and established childcare arrangements. She showed records of every doctor's appointment I'd taken Destiny to, every developmental screening, every vaccination. Rita presented my pay stubs and bank statements showing how I'd budgeted to provide everything Destiny needed despite my limited income. She talked about the early intervention services I'd arranged when Destiny's pediatrician noted some developmental delays, and how Destiny was already showing improvement with consistent support. Rita emphasized that I'd sacrificed my education and career plans to give Destiny the stability she deserved, dropping to part-time classes and working around daycare schedules. She showed the court my revised degree plan that would take 3 more years instead of 1, proof that I was committed to raising Destiny long-term. Rita's presentation was thorough and organized, each piece of evidence building on the last to show the complete picture of the life I'd built for Destiny. Kayla's public defender stood up for his closing argument, and I braced myself. He talked about how Kayla was only 19, barely more than a child herself when she became a mother. He said she'd made mistakes, but that every young parent made mistakes, and that she deserved a chance to be a real mother with proper support and structure. He pointed to her completion of parenting classes and her consistent therapy attendance as evidence of her commitment to change. He argued that the court should consider a gradual reunification plan that would allow Kayla to rebuild her relationship with Destiny over time, starting with increased visitation and working toward shared custody. He said taking away a mother's child permanently was a drastic step that should only happen in cases of severe abuse or neglect, and that Kayla's situation was more about being young and overwhelmed than being unfit. The public defender spoke passionately, but I could tell he was working with limited information, that he didn't really know Kayla or understand the full scope of what had happened. Rita was already preparing her response. The judge called me to testify, and I walked to the witness stand on shaky legs. Rita started with basic questions about when Kayla moved in with me and how the living situation evolved. I described the first few weeks when I thought Kayla just needed temporary help, then how it became clear she had no intention of actually parenting Destiny. I walked through my documentation, explaining how I'd started keeping records after Kayla listed me as Destiny's primary caregiver without permission. Rita asked me to describe a typical week during the time Kayla lived with me, and I detailed the nights Kayla would disappear, the mornings I'd wake up to find Destiny alone in her crib crying while Kayla was passed out or not home at all. I talked about missing work and failing my classes because I was the only one caring for Destiny. Rita asked about the financial impact, and I explained how I'd gone into debt buying formula and diapers while Kayla spent her child support money on herself. I kept my voice steady and stuck to facts like Rita had coached me, avoiding emotional accusations even though my throat was tight with anger. Then Rita asked the hardest question, whether I'd ever wanted to be Destiny's mother. I paused before answering honestly, saying no, I'd never planned to have a child this young, and I'd never wanted to take Kayla's place. But I said Destiny deserved consistency and security more than Kayla deserved second chances, and that I'd stepped up because someone had to. I admitted I loved Destiny completely now, But that didn't erase the sacrifices I'd made, or the childhood Destiny had lost waiting for her mother to grow up. Kayla was crying at her table, but I kept looking at the judge like Rita told me to. Kayla's public defender cross-examined me briefly, asking if I'd ever tried to help Kayla instead of just documenting her failures. I explained that I'd offered help repeatedly, that I'd given Kayla a place to live and watch Destiny while she was supposed to be looking for work or going to appointments. He asked if I thought Kayla loved Destiny, and I said yes. I believed she loved her, but love wasn't enough when a child needed consistent care and stability. He tried a few more questions but couldn't shake my testimony because everything I'd said was documented and true. I stepped down and returned to my seat next to Rita, my hands still trembling. Then Kayla took the stand and surprised me. Instead of launching into her usual blame game, she admitted she hadn't been ready to be a mother. She said she'd made terrible choices and put her own wants ahead of Destiny's needs. Kayla talked about being 17 and scared when she got pregnant, about how Tony leaving had broken something in her. She cried while saying she loved Destiny but understood why I'd had to step in, that Destiny deserved better than what she'd been providing. Kayla said she was working on herself in therapy and taking the parenting classes seriously because she hoped to be a real mom someday, even if that meant starting with supervised visits and earning back trust slowly. She looked at me when she said she was sorry for everything she'd put me through, for blaming me for her own mistakes. Her public defender asked if she wanted to be part of Destiny's life, and Kayla said yes, but that she knew it had to be on terms that were best for Destiny, not what was easiest for her. I didn't know what to do with this version of my sister, this person who was finally taking responsibility. Part of me wanted to believe she'd really changed. Most of me remembered all the other times she'd said the right things before going right back to her old patterns. Judge Boggs called a recess to review all the evidence and testimony. Rita and I went out to the hallway and I sat on the bench trying not to throw up from anxiety. Everything felt unreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Rita kept reassuring me that the evidence was overwhelming, that the judge had seen everything she needed to see. Then Raina showed up with coffee from the shop down the street, sitting next to me and putting her arm around my shoulders. She reminded me that whatever happened, I'd done everything right for Destiny. She said I'd fought for my niece when everyone else had walked away, and that took courage. We sat there for 20 minutes while the judge reviewed the case, and I watched other families moving through the courthouse with their own dramas and crises. Everyone here had a story. Everyone was fighting for something. The bailiff called us back and we returned to the courtroom. Judge Boggs looked at both tables before speaking, her expression serious. She said she'd reviewed all the evidence, testimony, and evaluation reports carefully. The judge noted that Kayla had made some recent efforts toward improvement, but that 2 months of classes and therapy couldn't outweigh 18 months of documented neglect and abandonment. She talked about Destiny's need for stability and consistent care, especially given her young age and developmental needs. Then Judge Boggs delivered her ruling, granting me full legal and physical custody of Destiny. She said Kayla would have supervised visitation twice monthly at the Family Services Center, with the possibility of increased visitation if she maintained consistent progress over the next 6 months. The judge emphasized that this arrangement prioritized Destiny's well-being, while still allowing Kayla to maintain a relationship with her daughter if she continued working on herself. Kayla was crying but nodding, not arguing or making a scene. I felt Rita squeeze my hand and heard Raina let out a breath beside me. The judge added conditions to Kayla's visitation, requiring her to continue therapy and complete follow-up parenting education. She said the case would be reviewed in 6 months to assess whether any modifications were appropriate. Then it was over. I had full custody of Destiny. The judge continued, saying Kayla needed to finish her probation requirements and keep going to therapy. She had to show up for every visit with Destiny for 6 months straight and prove her life was stable before she could ask for more time. Kayla nodded while tears ran down her face. She didn't look mad at me like usual. She just looked sad and beat down, like she finally understood what she'd lost. Rita packed up her papers and I sat there feeling weird. I'd won, but it didn't feel like winning. The bailiff said we could leave and everyone started moving toward the doors. I picked up my bag and walked out into the hallway where the fluorescent lights were too bright. My Aunt Raina hugged me and said she was proud. Rita squeezed my shoulder and said she'd call me later about the paperwork. Then Kayla came up to me. Her mascara was smudged and she looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her. She said she was sorry for everything she'd put me through. She said Destiny was lucky to have me. Her voice cracked when she asked if we could still be sisters even though she'd lost custody. I told her I hoped so, but that rebuilding trust takes time. She nodded and wiped her eyes and walked away with her public defender. I picked up Destiny from the daycare center where she'd been during the hearing. She ran to me yelling "Mama" and wrapped her arms around my legs. I buckled her into her car seat and drove us home through afternoon traffic. When we got to my apartment, I carried her inside and set her down. She went straight to her toy box like always. I stood in the kitchen looking at her playing on the living room floor. The permanence of everything hit me hard right then. I was her legal mother now, not just her temporary guardian. I was 24 years old, single, working part-time at a grocery store, and now I was solely responsible for raising a toddler. I loved her more than anything, but I'd never planned to be a parent at this age. 3 days later, Rita came over with a stack of forms. She helped me file for child support from Tony since I was now Destiny's legal guardian. We also went through the application for benefits I was actually entitled to now. The financial support would help with rent and groceries and daycare costs. But money didn't change the fact that my whole life had gone in a completely different direction than what I'd imagined when I was 18 and planning my future. The next week, I met with my academic advisor at community college. Her office was small with motivational posters on the walls. I explained my situation and she pulled up my transcript on her computer. We worked out a plan for me to take online classes at night after Destiny went to bed. Instead of graduating in one more year like I'd planned, it would take 3 years. It felt like both a loss and something I could actually do. She printed out the new course schedule and wished me luck. 2 weeks after the custody ruling, Kayla had her first supervised visit at the Family Services Center. I brought Destiny at exactly 2 o'clock like the schedule said. The supervisor was a woman named Miss Chen, who had a clipboard and a kind smile. Kayla was already there waiting in the visitation room. She got down on the floor with Destiny right away and started playing with the blocks. She read her books and did puzzles with her instead of being on her phone. For the whole hour, she actually paid attention and acted like a mom. When I picked Destiny up, Miss Chen said the visit went well and noted the improvement in her report. I felt cautiously hopeful that maybe Kayla was starting to understand what being a parent actually meant. My parents started coming over more after that. My mom would bring groceries and my dad would fix things around my apartment that were broken. They'd play with Destiny and watch her so I could do homework or run errands. One evening, my mom was washing dishes in my kitchen, and she said she saw a lot of herself in Kayla's immaturity. She said she wished she'd handled the pregnancy differently instead of kicking Kayla out. We started having more honest conversations about our family and the patterns we all fell into. It didn't fix everything, but it felt like a start. A month later, I joined a support group for kinship caregivers that met every Thursday night at a church basement. There were about 12 people there raising their grandkids or nieces or nephews. They shared stories about dealing with the courts and managing visits with biological parents and struggling with money. Hearing their experiences made me feel less alone. One woman named Patricia was raising her 3 grandsons and working 2 jobs. Another guy named James had custody of his sister's twin daughters. Everyone there understood that family was complicated and messy. They reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. 3 months after the final custody ruling, Destiny started calling me Mama all the time. She barely asked about Kayla between visits anymore. I felt guilty about this, even though the therapist I'd started seeing said it was normal for toddlers to attach to their primary caregiver. I made sure to show Destiny photos of Kayla on my phone and talk about her in positive ways. I'd say things like, "Your other mama loves you very much, and she's working hard to be the best mama she can be." Destiny would look at the pictures and say, "Okay," and then go back to playing. 4 months after everything, Kayla's therapist sent a progress report to the court saying she was doing well. Kayla had gone to every single supervised visit without missing one. She'd finished all her probation requirements and paid back some of the money she owed. She got a job at a retail store in the mall, folding clothes and working the register. She moved into her own studio apartment and sent me pictures of it. The apartment was small but clean, with a bed and a table and a TV. She texted asking if I was proud of her. I texted back saying I was proud of her efforts and I hoped she kept building a stable life. I texted back that I was proud of her work and hoped she kept going. Then I added that custody wouldn't change anytime soon. She needed to know I wasn't going to flip everything just because she'd been doing better for a few months. Her reply came fast. She said she understood and that she had to prove herself over time. She wrote that Destiny's well-being came first, and she got that now. Reading those words from Kayla felt strange. She'd never talked like that before. Maybe the therapy was actually working. Maybe she was starting to see things clearly instead of through the filter of blame and excuses she'd used for years. I wanted to believe it, but I also knew people could say the right things without meaning them. Time would tell if this was real change or just another performance. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the Family Services Center. Tony had contacted them about setting up visitation with Destiny. The supervisor said he'd completed the required background check and parenting class and wanted to start his twice-monthly visits. I felt weird about it. Tony had barely been around since Destiny was born. He sent child support because the court made him, but he'd never asked to see her before. Now suddenly he wanted to be a dad. The supervisor scheduled his first visit for the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. I brought Destiny to the center and Tony was already there in the visitation room. He looked nervous. His hands kept moving and he couldn't seem to figure out where to stand. When Destiny saw him, she hid behind my legs. She didn't remember him. The supervisor gently encouraged her to go play, and Tony got down on the floor with some blocks. He tried to build a tower but kept knocking it over. Destiny watched him for a minute, then slowly walked over and handed him a block. Something in my chest loosened watching them. Tony wasn't good at this. He was awkward and uncertain and clearly had no idea what he was doing. But he was trying. He read her a book with all the voices wrong and she giggled. He pushed her on the little indoor swing and she squealed. By the end of the hour, they were playing peekaboo, and Destiny was calling him daddy, even though she probably didn't understand what that meant. The supervisor noted that the visit went well. Tony asked when he could come back and scheduled his next visit for 2 weeks later. Driving home with Destiny asleep in her car seat, I thought about how messy this whole situation was. Kayla was trying to get her life together. Tony was finally stepping up. My parents were involved again. Even with all the pain and dysfunction and legal battles, Destiny had people who cared about her. That had to count for something. 6 months passed. Kayla kept going to therapy and showing up for her visits. Tony came every 2 weeks like clockwork. My parents helped with babysitting and brought groceries. Raina checked in regularly to see how we were doing. Slowly, something that almost felt like normal started to form. Then Destiny's 3rd birthday came. I spent a week planning a small party at my apartment. I bought decorations and ordered a cake with a unicorn on it because Destiny was obsessed with unicorns lately. I invited Kayla and Tony and my parents and Raina. Part of me expected someone to cancel or start drama or ruin everything like usual. But the day came and everyone showed up. Kayla arrived first with a wrapped present and a nervous smile. She'd bought Destiny a stuffed unicorn that was almost as big as Destiny herself. Destiny hugged it immediately and dragged it around the apartment. Tony came next with a card and some books. My parents brought more food than we could possibly eat. Raina set up the decorations while I finished getting everything ready. For a few hours, we almost felt like a normal family. Kayla helped serve cake without complaining. Tony played with Destiny and the other kids from the building I'd invited. My parents took pictures and laughed at Destiny's excitement over every present. Nobody fought. Nobody brought up the custody battle or the court or any of the painful history between us. We just celebrated a little girl turning 3. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around. Destiny stood on a chair so she could reach the candles. Her face was already smeared with frosting from sneaking tastes earlier. I lit the 3 candles and we all sang happy birthday. Watching her blow them out with everyone cheering, I felt something shift inside me. My 20s were supposed to be different. I was supposed to finish college and start a career and maybe travel or date or do all the things people do in their 20s. Instead, I was raising a toddler alone in a tiny apartment while working part-time and taking online classes. I'd lost the life I'd planned. But looking at Destiny's joy as she clapped and laughed surrounded by people who loved her, I knew I'd made the right choice. She was happy and healthy and safe. She'd grow up knowing she was wanted and fought for. That was worth every sacrifice. Life didn't turn out how I expected, but I wouldn't change it. Not when it meant protecting her. Not when it meant she got to have moments like this with frosting on her face and a room full of people who cared.